Very cool. I have Dan Handford on the Capital Raiser show. Super pumped up to talk to him. He's one of my heroes in the marketing space and obviously an amazing multifamily syndicator. Can't wait to talk to you. Welcome to the show, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Ruben. I appreciate you having me on and looking forward to sharing with your audience here.
Yeah, man, I can't wait. It's like it's almost like I have an encyclopedia in front of me. I can't wait to ask you all these questions and share all of this knowledge. For those that don't know who Dan Handford is, he's with a company called Passive Investing and he's just crushing it. He's also with Multifamily Investor Nation, which for me is one of the most inspiring things about you, Dan, is the way that you've built this marketing campaign and created so much visibility. And for somebody who is excited about raising capital and marketing and doing those aspects of things, there's nobody else that you can really look up to on your level. You're just doing a phenomenal job on that particular aspect of your business, but you crush it in all areas of your business. So that's really cool. I do want to jump right in. For people that don't know your story, can you tell us a little bit about your previous businesses and what about those businesses led you into multifamily syndication?
Sure, absolutely. So I'll take you all the way back to when I was in chiropractic college. So for some of you don't really know this, but I'm actually a chiropractor by trade. I'm still licensed here in the state of South Carolina. That's where I'm located, here in Columbia, South Carolina. And when I was in chiropractic college is when I really started my first successful business. And I was in we actually do those classes in quarters. So when I was in my first quarter of chiropractic college, all the students needed a spine model to be able to learn about the spine and how to adjust it and various things like that. Well, the one in the bookstore was being sold for $189.95. And I heard a lot of students complaining about it. So I went to the bookstore, found out the manufacturer, and went and found one of their distributors and built a relationship with them. And they told me that if I can get an order of 20 of them together, then they would let me sell their product and they would sell it to me for only $65. So I was like, well, wow, that's great. So I put together a order form and it got in front of all the student body and ended up selling it for $69.95. I figured if I can make, about $5 per spine and, sell 20 or 40 of them, I can, do a good deed for the students, but also make some nice money on it on the side, a couple $100. I did that. And then the first week I sold 80 of those spines in the first week. And so then, of course, my wheels got turning some more, thinking, well, I wonder if I can just cut out the distributor that I was going with and go straight to the manufacturer. And I did that and I called up their dealer, program that they had and said, hey, what does it take for me to become a dealer? And kind of told them what I was planning on doing. And they allowed me to become one of their top tier discount dealers, if you will, and was able to get that spine model, including the shipping, for $42.48. So instead of, being just a couple hundred, it meant quite a bit more profit for me because I sold 80 of them the first week. And then 2 weeks later, I sold another 40. And what that did is it opened me up to be able to sell their entire catalog of products. It's not just spines, but skeletons and skulls and brains and hearts and ears and nose and all types of plastic anatomy models. And so I started a company called shopanatomical.com. And on that website, we've had it now for going on 13 years now. And we do 7 figures a year of revenue on that website consistently every year. And I have a whole team that kind of runs that now, so I don't have to mess with it. And being able to have that and start that in school, because I even remember in school, like instead of, during breaks in class, instead of going in the hallways and chatting with, friends or whatever, I would make sure I got to the school real early in the morning so I can park my car close to the building. And I had an SUV at the time. And so I put a laptop stand in there that was built into the SUV. And I would take customer calls and respond to customer emails and, process orders and do all that kind of stuff in between classes. And so it allowed me to be able to, go through chiropractic college and, start on the other end of it. Once I got my license and get started, I was able to start my own practice and use the funds that I made from this business to be able to start it debt free. And kind of fast forward to where we are today, I actually now have 4 medical clinics. I don't do chiropractic in these clinics anymore. We actually do a lot of referrals back and forth with outside chiropractors, but we do a lot of non-surgical orthopedics and sports medicine, a lot of prolotherapy, like of regenerative medicine, like prolotherapy, PRP, stem cells, things like that. And when I started to build out those clinics, we were able to start those and build them out debt-free. So all of our businesses that we have are debt-free, even to this day. But the problem is that that we were making more and more money off those clinics. And so we had to write larger and larger checks to the government.
Yeah.
And so in order to reduce our taxable liability, that's how I got into multifamily, is because I wanted to have that additional depreciation to be able to offset my income so I can start to pay less by investing into real estate.
Yeah, man. I love the fact that you were entrepreneurial through college, but then as you became super successful in your business, you realized that you had a tax problem. And I think a lot of people, when they're focused on the marketing side of real estate and who their persona or avatar, their investor avatar is, they don't necessarily always focus on the person, the business owner with the tax problem. But those are some of the people that you can serve the greatest through this business. Okay, so I want to talk about a couple things that you said. Number one, the show obviously goes into a lot of different directions, but you mentioned a procedure that you guys do called Prolotherapy. I don't think a lot of people know what that is. I've actually had Prolotherapy on my joint or on my knee after my ACL and meniscus surgery. And most recently I was in a car accident. They did Prolotherapy to repair some torn labrums that I had. Can you explain what Prolotherapy is? Do you like it? Are you a big subscriber to it? Or is it just something that your medical practices do? And tell me about it.
Yeah, so no, everything we do in the clinics is something that I'm really passionate about. I really wanted to have included in the clinics themselves. And so prolotherapy is for those of you who might not have heard of that before, the best way to explain it is somebody who has a chronic injury. It's not usually for anything acute because the body usually takes really good care of that, but somebody who has a chronic injury where they've had the injury, a couple of weeks or a couple of months ago or a couple of years ago, and they still have this residual ligament laxity, which is causing some issues. The prolotherapy actually helps to kind of do what's called an artificial re-injuring to that particular tissue and allows for the body to be able to start the healing cascade to be able to heal that joint and tighten it up and actually repair it. And it's used on it's a series of injections that are actually done along the side of the ligament or even on the tendon that helps to bring in those healing properties. And it's used, usually the injection is a very small needle. It's not as, some people would say it's painful, but depending on what kind of pain you're in now, it could actually be a lot worse.
It is worth it. It is worth it. Yeah, I healed up nicely. And then, so they put ozone in there frequently, or sometimes they put, I forget the name of the substance, but something that causes inflammation in there.
Yep. Dextrose.
It was dextrose. Yep. So the dextrose increases the inflammation, which allows blood to get in there and do the healing work. So it's amazing stuff. Look into it for those of you guys that have joint specific injuries. It's awesome. It's awesome stuff. So there's not a lot of doctors that offer that service.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I want to go back even further. So I want to know who Dan Handford, the teenager, was. And tell me maybe about some of the things that you learned prior to, when did you realize you wanted to be an entrepreneur?
Well, I'll tell you, I've always kind of had that as a part of me. My mother always tells me that I was an entrepreneur ever since I was born. Like I was born and I had to try to negotiate with the doctor which butt cheek he was going to slap, right?
Awesome.
So, I mean, over the years, I've constantly had my hands in various, ventures, if you will. And, I've done pressure. I had my own pressure cleaning business. I had a lawn business. So, even younger than that, doing, selling candy door to door and helping people with various fundraisers. And, even to the point of when I got into high school, right before I got out, I actually started my own supplement company that I had a falling out with the partner. And so that kind of went under, but that company that started out and stuff like that as well. So I've had, I even remember selling Cutco knives, when I was a teenager.
Dude, I was with Vector Marketing a long time ago.
Yeah.
Very cool business. I love that stuff. All right, cool, man. So you have done a ton of webinars, and there's some specific things I've thought about what value I want to share that you can provide with my audience. And some of it comes from a webinar. It's called Structuring an Apartment Syndication with Dan Handford. It's on the Multifamily Investor Nation YouTube channel. And let's go into some of the things that you taught on that. If you don't mind explaining what a cumulative for all of the syndication audience that I have, and shout out to the Capital Racer Nation. Please leave us a 5-star rating. And also shout out to Bakerson, who's hooking up this studio for me, my new studio. I'll probably air your show first from this studio before anybody else's. So thank you for joining me on this journey of mine, going from, podcaster out of a bedroom to, now I got this really cool studio. But let's go right into some of the things that you taught. Can you explain what a cumulative preferred return is in a syndication? And let's just assume for the most part that people know what a syndication is. So you're not talking to somebody who's never heard of that.
Sure, sure. So let's first talk about preferred returns, because for me, I'm personally right now in 21 different passive investments with 8 different operators, and
Yeah.
including even the assets that I'm in. I'm always a passive investor in our own assets. But one of the things that I always look for is preferred returns. So I believe that it's a great alignment of interest, and to actually have that preferential treatment of the first proceeds, if you will, from the cash flows. So there's 2 types of preferred returns, and this is something that not a lot of people talk about. Is there's actually what is called cumulative preferred returns, which is what you're referring to, Ruben. And there's also the opposite of that, right? Non-cumulative preferred returns. And I will only invest in somebody who has cumulative preferred returns. And that's what we do on our projects here at passiveinvesting.com, is we have cumulative preferred returns. And what that means is that if for some reason you don't hit the preferred return one year, because it's cumulative, let's just give you an example. Let's just say we had a 7% preferred return. Well, if one year we only had a 6% return, then the next year, your preferred return actually goes up by the difference. So your next year, your preferred return would be 8%. And that continues to go forward up until you actually get made whole on that preferred return, or until we actually sell that asset. And when we sell that asset, it is also made whole when we sell the asset as well. But somebody who has a non-cumulative preferred return, that means if for some reason one year we don't hit the preferred return, you never get made up for that loss. You always just got to reset every year to the preferred return that you actually were originally projected.
Yeah, so there's definitely some other things that you covered in that webinar that I want to break out here for my audience. You mentioned pari passu preferred returns versus true preferred returns. Can you explain what the difference is between those two things?
Sure, sure. So a true preferred return would mean, and for those of you who might not know what preferred returns are, basically the first fruits, if you will, or the first cash that comes off of the property is given to the LP or the passive investor first before the sponsorship team gets any of their splits. And so that's that. There's 2 different types to look at. There's the cash flow returns, and then there's also the sale promote on the end, where we actually are selling the asset. And so a true preferred return means whether we are selling or whether we're in cash flows, there is no makeup or catch up, if you will, for the sponsorship team to be made whole up to that 7%. So if the first 7% is given to the LPs, a true preferred return is up to that 7%, 100% of the proceeds are given to the limited partners. And then everything else after that is split 70-30. The GP never goes back and actually makes themselves whole to that 7%. And that would be the more of the pari passu type of preferred return, where you are actually, the GP is actually made whole up to that point.
I love it. So just for the audience, so that they should know that I have not prepped Dan on any of these questions. So he's answering, thinking on his feet, which I definitely appreciate. I kind of want to go into a couple other things, but I don't want to make people crazy talking too much about numbers. So we'll come back to a couple of things.
I love it, Ruben. Keep it going. Keep it coming.
You talked about apartment syndication structures. So the way that you set up your company, and there's a couple of questions that I specifically have about that. You mentioned that you might actually do a webinar, and I don't know if you have or not. But the way that you set up your company is typically there's a single purpose equity that purchases the asset. Usually that equity is established in the same state where the asset is. And then from there, there's limited partners own 70% of that typically, or whatever portion. And then the GPs own 30%. The GP is a separate structure. And then that is owned by, whoever the partners are. In your case, there's 3 of you guys. And then those entities are set up in Wyoming. So can you tell us why those entities are done in Wyoming versus just in whatever state you live in?
Sure. So there's a couple of reasons why. So for one, the actual entity that is the manager entity that owns the 30% is actually a Delaware entity. And then each one of the partners entities that they own that actually own part of the manager entity are actually the Wyoming LLCs. So the reason why the Delaware entity, and a lot of lenders will actually require it once the loan gets over 25 million, they'll require that the actual borrower entity also be in Delaware. And it's because Delaware has a lot more business friendly rules and laws that benefit the businesses in that state. And they also have some expediting rules within the court system as well, so things don't get dragged out. And also from the Wyoming side, there's anonymity that's involved with that as well.
Yeah.
So kind of involving multiple states also on another level, it increases the challenge for somebody else to actually, produce a lawsuit, because not only do they have to sue you locally, which is the local state that their property is in, they also have to sue you in the state of Delaware, and they also have to sue you in the state of Wyoming, and go through different attorneys ad hoc wise and pay multiple people. So it makes costs more money to actually bring a litigation. So you get rid of a lot of your frivolous lawsuits that way as well.
Interesting. Yeah, I had an asset protection attorney on my show. I kind of wanted to go into some of the stuff that he talked about it, but I asked him a couple of things that I want to bring up. One of them is, when does it make sense to have a company in a different state? And he said, well, a lot of people sell that stuff, and usually it doesn't make sense. For example, if you are purchasing a single family dwelling in Arizona and it's with an LLC that's in Nevada, well, if somebody falls on your property and they sue in the state of Arizona and the asset is in Arizona and you try to apply Nevada law, it's not going to make a difference. The judge is going to say, hey, you're doing business in Arizona, we're going to apply Arizona law here. So in that case, it doesn't make sense. But in other cases, it does make sense. And you explained some of the anonymity purposes, and I like that. But he also went into, I asked him, Dan, I don't know if you're familiar with this topic, but I asked him, what's the difference between holding an asset in a trust versus holding an asset in an LLC? He explained basically that an LLC is typically the best option, but if you have a ton of assets and you're a multifamily syndicator and you're taking on all this liability because people are giving you their money, he explained that you can do these things called asset protection trusts. The difference being, he said that you can diversify the jurisdiction of where the property enforces law. So if you have a trust in the Cayman Islands that recognizes an asset protection trust, it may not recognize U.S. law. And if a judge sees, if one of your property crashes or burns in spectacular fashion, he said that a judge will look at all of your assets like a big pie, and a lot of times the creditors can penetrate it. But if you're being protected through jurisdictions outside of the U.S. or in such a way where they don't recognize U.S. law, that can be a major benefit. Do you use anything like this in your business, or what do you do to protect yourself from all the liability you're taking on as a syndicator, because you're raising many millions of dollars?
Yeah. So there's a lot of different reasons why using, LLCs versus trust. I'm not the best person to be able
Right.
to give advice on that, because obviously I'm not qualified for that. But we buy a lot of insurance, I'll tell you that.
Okay.
So I probably spend more money on insurance than most people, just because there's a lot to protect, right? And obviously there's the benefits being in a trust when it comes to somebody suing you personally, because if there's some protections there if it's in a trust versus just in your own name, various things like that. There are rules of being able to even in the States, being able to have that piercing, what's called piercing the corporate veil when it comes to the LLCs. But it's very hard to do. A lot of the things that people say that could be done is very, very rare, right, to actually happen. And so being able to protect yourself by, making it difficult for somebody to do that, because if you try to pierce the corporate veil here and in Delaware and in Wyoming, you're going to have a lot of challenges to have all three of those people agree with each other to actually pierce it. Now, there's a couple different ways to look at it, because if somebody sues you personally, then they can get what's called top-down access, right? So if you're up at the top up here and you own 5 different companies, but they sue you personally and they win personally, they can get access to those different companies because they sued you personally. But if the liability stays within one of the companies, they can't go up and get money from you unless they can pierce that corporate veil and get access to you because of some negligent way about how you're actually running your books. That's why it's very important that if you actually have a company, you run it like a company, like an LLC, where you have a separate set of books and you keep things separate. You don't siphon off funds to use for your own personal use, because at the end of the day, that could definitely be a reason why they can pierce the corporate veil if they choose to.
Very cool, man. I don't know if you were, obviously you were not expecting that question, but you handled that pretty good. I love that. I want to talk about raising capital, specifically some things that I haven't heard you address. Like, I want to know about working with family offices. How do you make yourself a presence within the family office space and get connections and grow that aspect of your network?
Sure. So I would say that for us, we have not penetrated that piece of it before. And because in the beginning, we kind of did some investigating and looking into it. And the problem that I saw, which is a problem for us, but it's not necessarily always a problem for everybody. So I don't want to say this as a blanket statement, like don't go after
Hmm.
family offices, but the family offices typically want to have larger spreads. So if you're typically going out there with a 7 or 8% pref and, doing your typical 70-30 splits, they're probably not going to like that. They're going to want more like 90-10 or 95-5 or 80-20, and they're going to probably cut some of your fees out. And they want to be in a preferred position in the equity stack as well. So they want to have that preferred equity position. And so there's a lot of things that they can actually ask for when they bring those larger checks. And so that's one of the reasons why we decided to not pursue the family office route, because of that. And then the other side of it, and I've never talked to somebody that said, oh yeah, they family office just invested alongside everybody else. They don't do that. They want to have that
Mm.
preferential treatment for their actual, family that they're representing, right? We have had a family office invest with us, but it was on a very, very small level. And it was more like kind of tipping their toes
Trial
in.
run.
And it wasn't a very significant amount, and they didn't cause us to change because it was a small amount, and we were like, we don't really need to change, right? And they never asked. They were just investing alongside us on the LP side to kind of dip their toes, if you will. I have talked to other people that have used family office funds, and they have done it very successfully, but obviously they gave up some of their spread in order to do that. And so that's just something that we haven't needed to do. And it's another reason why we haven't gone after the institutional equity, right?
Hmm.
Our whole group, passiveinvesting.com, is built on trying to help smaller investors that don't normally have access to these types of investments. So
Mm.
we want to make sure that we protect our assets as much as we can to open it up to private investors that can invest a minimum of $50,000 in our assets, but they might not necessarily have 5 million who actually invest in it, but they still want to be able to be investing in these higher quality, institutional grade assets.
Yeah, interesting. So you really have an outward focus on helping the regular investor, because some people might think like going to a placement agent or a single source equity or institutional financing so that they can meet their needs and raise capital for their deals might be kind of inward focused, but it sounds like you have the intention of helping as many people get out of the rat race as possible or help them create some generational wealth. I love that about you.
There's one other thing about large checks as well, as you have to always be thinking about, and that's, you want to make sure that at the end of the day they have the power, right? So what happens if they're bringing a large check and then they get to a day before closing and they back out, right? They're
Mm.
That's going to be kind of hard for you to be able to raise that significant amount a day before closing, especially if maybe you don't have extensions. And so what I've seen happen before is somebody who's bringing this large check, they think that they're getting this certain spread, and the day before closing, they pull out and say, we're out unless we get more, right? And so now they're like holding that over you to give you more spread, to give them more spread and take it away from you. So there's definitely some things that you want to make sure you have in place if you go down that route, with maybe having them participate in some of the hard earnest money up front so that they actually have some money to lose, right?
That's
And then
smart.
also having them sign some side agreements saying that they will close on the property, and that and even having them, if it's a significant amount, having them make sure that they wire those funds in early instead of waiting until the day before they close.
Yeah, I heard you talk about that on another webinar I heard maybe a week or two back, where you have worked with some people in passive deals, or maybe as somebody that helped raise capital for deals, and they would wait a little bit towards the end before having more than just verbal commitments. And you're like, yeah, good luck with that, dude. So what do you have in place to make sure that you have those funds ready to go and that they don't back out? You probably have some backup funding in place and some other things, but tell us a little, walk us down that a little bit.
Sure. I mean, we definitely have some backup funding if it's required or if it's necessary. We also know that the amount that we need to be able to close is different than the amount that we projected to raise, right? So if we're projected to raise, say, $5 million, we may only need 3.5 or 4 to actually close on the property. We can kind of future fund the rest of it if we need to. We haven't had to do that on any of our assets so far, but that is an option that we have in there as kind of like a fail safe, or as kind of a buffer there for us. Now you kind of are going into not even just raising capital, right? We're really talking about, because I always think of raising capital as separate than just securing capital, right? There's two different types here. So raising capital, I think of more as finding investors, educating them, getting them under the fold so that when you're ready for their next project that you have to go out with, you now have them properly educated and ready on the sidelines to deploy capital. And now you move into this phase of called securing capital. And this is really kind of what you're getting at is well, how do you make sure that they send in their funds during that securing capital phase? And a lot of it has to do with having very clear, concise timelines in place that they understand, and you follow those timelines. Like whenever you have a funding deadline, ours is always 3 weeks before we close. We want to make sure we have all those funds in 3 weeks before we close. Do we always have them all in? No. If I put it the day before we close, guess what? We're probably not going to have it in there either, right? So I want to make sure I have enough time in there if I need to bring in some other funds, or making sure I know kind of how many additional investors I need to bring in if for some reason I have a few that just don't wire or don't fund or whatever. But having that clear timeline and stuff set out front is very important, and not having ranges as much as possible. Like you don't want to say funding deadline is this date to this date. No, right? You want to have it just whatever that last date is, that should be the actual date of the funding. Whenever you're going to have your PPMs ready, this is the time frame you're going to have the PPMs ready. This is the time frame we're going to actually close. Obviously, closing dates are a little bit harder to kind of pin down. So we usually do the week of, right? And it's usually that Friday of that week is when we're usually targeting to be able to close, but we may close a little bit early. Like if we have no extensions in place on a deal, we might close 2 or 3 days early and push the lender to close early just in case there's an issue. Because you don't want to get to that last day and then there'd be an issue and you have no extension and you lose your earnest money deposit. And so, but a lot of it just has to do with communicating, and even before your securing capital phase, of talking to them about securing capital as well. One of the things that we send to our investors is right over here. We actually send out a newsletter just like this to our investors on a monthly basis. It's a printed out, nice high gloss, newsletter that we send out, and we educate our investors before we get to the phase of actually securing that capital. And it's been very important because we can talk about, what is a soft commit and how it works and how you should be using them to your advantage. And, how if you, soft commit 3 times in a row and you back out, we're removing you from our investor list, right? Because if you've looked at 3 of our projects and you didn't invest, then you probably, aren't going to be a good fit for us in the future. So let's not waste your time. Let's not waste mine. We talk about 1031 exchanges and how to, how we 1031 out of our projects to continue to build that legacy wealth, and how people who are selling assets right now can 1031 into our assets, and various things like that too. So this is an important tool to be able to kind of prime your investors before you actually get into securing capital on your next project.
Very cool. Dan, I've seen you at a few different events. I saw you at IMN, the mid-market multifamily event out there. I saw you at Todd Dexheimer's event in Minneapolis, the North Star Real Estate Conference, and most recently at the Best Ever Conference, where you had this film crew following you around. I want to go back to one specific, I think it was the first time that I ever met you in person. You were in Minneapolis, and you were talking about differentiating yourself. And you actually had this special engagement that happened at your keynote speech, where all of a sudden there's all these girls dancing around, and my wife is there, and she's like trying to cover my eyes, but she's a little jealous. But no, it was very sweet and innocent actually. But you had some cheerleaders come out there, and I don't think anybody was expecting that. Can you explain what that was all about and what you were trying to teach the audience?
Sure. So, and I will tell you that Todd actually emailed me after that event and said he had a few people talk to him about that, and very similar to what you just said. And I said, well, I didn't know how they were going to look and how they were going to dress. They were supposed to be a flash mob that just basically came up and did a number to kind of, stand out, if you will. So I've done it with multiple types of events, and I've done it with like a marching band, and I've done it with Bollywood dancers and stuff like that. So you're right. It's supposed to be something that's just innocent to kind of make a point during my keynote. And the whole point that I was trying to make is that in order for you to be able to kind of be the person that's differentiating yourself and standing out from this crowd, and people wanting to look for you to invest with you, you have to do things that are kind of going to, stand out, right? And so when I say stand out, that's when they came out and they did their, whole bit and stuff. But everybody in that room, just like yourself, will never forget that, right? And it's something that I did to kind of stand out, and it's stuff that people talk about all the time. And I even get investor calls now from people that are in those rooms that see that and go, yeah, I was at this event or that event, and you did a great job. And I love the dancers, and I love the marching band or whatever I was doing at that time. and they never forgot about me. And then they continue to hear me over and over and over in various, events or webinars or things online. And it allows me to be able to stand out. But for those of for your audience that's listening, you kind of have to think about ways to stand out yourself. What are you going to do to kind of get your investors to want to invest with you versus wanting to invest with somebody else? And for me, what we try to do is we try to really take investor relations to heart, right? Our investors are not just numbers. Every single one of my investors, they get a text message from me personally, not an auto text that basically gives them my contact card and says, here's my information, my office address, my email, my phone number. Call me, text me, email me, whatever you can do. We want to make sure you have access to be able to ask me any questions and be available. We want to be able to create that personal relationship with them so that as we move forward into these projects, we are actually growing together. And that's also one of the reasons why, we do this newsletter, because we want to educate them. And one of the things that we do is we give them some fun stuff. Like you can see on the back of here, this is actually a word search that we put together for the investors. And even inside of this newsletter, I don't have it sitting in here, there's actually a coloring sheet that we actually put inside of this sheet for their children. And we actually have our investors, they'll actually send in pictures. You can see this right here. Have some investors that have sent in pictures of their kids actually coloring the page and doing the word search, and they're actually asking, their kids are asking them questions that are on the word search. Because on this word search right now, there's things about, depreciation and deferral and equity and fundamentals and institutional and profit. And they're like, hey, Daddy, what's an asset?
I
Can
love
you tell
it.
me what that is?
One of the nice things that I like about your investor newsletter is that it allows you to capture everybody's personal address, and your response rate, your open rate is much higher and more successful when you actually get out to that. So that's really cool about your newsletter. But since we're getting ready to wrap up here, I want to go through this thing I call the lightning round, which is a quick set of questions for you to answer within about 10-20 seconds. But let's go ahead and get started on that. Tell me, where is your favorite steakhouse?
In New York City, across from the stock exchange, there is my top steak restaurant called Delmonico's. And it is definitely by far my favorite steak restaurant.
Very cool. Your drink of choice?
I would say, I know a lot of people go with, alcoholic drinks or whatever, but I actually lately, because of some of the dietary changes I've been doing, I actually really just like water, honestly.
That's good. I'm proud of you. Tell me, who was your favorite president or is?
I would say that, right now, the current president that's in, which is Donald Trump, I feel like he's, right now, especially with the whole COVID-19 crisis that's going on, he's not just looking at it from an economic standpoint, he's looking at it from a human life standpoint. And he even said on a press conference today that, this isn't just about trying to save the economy, it's about trying to save lives.
Yeah.
And the amount of, lives that are being saved by the efforts that they're trying to do. And it's not just him right now, this is a whole bipartisan effect that is happening right now. And we've never seen anything like this happen before. So a lot of the stuff that we're doing is really kind of, unprecedented.
Absolutely. Tell me your secret getaway of choice.
A secret getaway of choice. So I have a friend of mine and you're talking about getaway like a vehicle or like a vacation?
It could be like when you need to relax, where do you go?
Okay. Okay, well, I'll kind of give you a little bit of a curveball. So I'd probably say at least 3 or 4 times a week, Ruben, I have a jacuzzi tub in my house.
Oh, wow.
I also have a hot tub outside by the pool. And usually about 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes more. Like yesterday, I was actually in it twice because it was just a really crazy day. I go and just relax in the jacuzzi and turn the heat up on the water and the water flowing with the bubbles and, just get in there and just relax.
A couple more real quick. Your favorite book?
My favorite book right now, outside of the Bible, I would say that my favorite book is The 10X Rule by Grant Cardone. I'm not as big of a fan of Grant as some people are, but I'm kind of in the middle. Like I don't like him. I don't hate him and I don't love him. I'm kind of in the middle.
I'm there too.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of things that he says that are really right on point. I mean, that book has been really, instrumental in allowing me to be able to grow as a person and as an entrepreneur and a business owner.
All right. Your favorite relative?
My favorite relative. I'll have to plead the fifth on that one. How about that?
Awesome.
Not that I know very many of my relatives listening to this, but I'll just plead the fifth on that one.
Spiritual philosophy in 20 seconds.
Spiritual philosophy. I'll say this. So I'm a born again Christian and I have all the things that I put in place, whether it be my morals and ethics and all of that are based on scripture and what is actually taught in the Bible. I would say it would encompass my entire spiritual philosophy.
Great answer. I love that. Now, do you believe manifesting can be done through subconscious auto-suggestion, the way Napoleon Hill talks about in Think and Grow Rich?
Subconscious, I don't know if I would necessarily say that it could be done through subconscious suggestions, but is it possible? I think it is possible, but would I rely on that? No. To me, I'm more of an action taker, and I'm just one of those types of people. I want to do something or I want to learn something. I'm just going to go and do it, right? And I think that's kind of, for me, what I've actually practiced.
Yeah, and he talks about the action part of it too in the book. All right, cool, man. So let's wrap up. Tell the audience, where are the best places to get a hold of you?
So there's a couple of different places. So you can go to our website, passiveinvesting.com, or if you want, you can also find us out more on a lot of the different social media channels under Multifamily Investor Nation. And we also have our own podcast called the Multifamily Investor Nation Podcast. And we only interview people that have actually closed a deal in the last 12 months.
Yeah.
We really dive deep into those acquisitions.
Man, it's been great having you. I wish I could keep you on here for another 2 hours. I would just continue to ask you a million questions, but it's been so much fun. I really wish I was going out to your event, the Raising Capital event that you're having here at the end of this month, but it'll be the next one before I get to see you over there. And hopefully the same thing with the ATVs and hanging out with you at your house will be available. But man,
no problem at all. I appreciate you
great.
having me on here, Ruben. Looking forward to having you coming to one of my events pretty soon. It actually got this one next week. Actually, just got postponed today because of
sweet. Maybe I still can't come.
That's right. That's right. So we'll be sending out some new dates pretty soon.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you soon, man. Take care.
All right. You too. I love it, Ruben. Keep it going.